Good morning, everybody. Is number 2 a charm for us today with our Midwest theme? Good morning. How are you? Happy Wednesday from Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. Yesterday was a bit of a mishap. All of a sudden, I'm doing the live feed talking about this great book that we're, I think, also invested in already, and the power went out here. That's what happened. It wasn't you. The power went out. And of course, it took me a while to figure it out because of my technical prowess. So I was looking on here and I could see it was disconnected, and I just kept going. I thought, it's disconnected, but it's probably fine, right? It wasn't fine. It was out. So I did a great show. I didn't do all of it. I was blathering on and on and on. But yeah, we'll see what happens. It was a wild weather day here yesterday. I guess it killed the power for a split second, but it was enough to kill. It was the first time it's happened here. It was enough to kill the thread, and then I would have to go into the support program that does it, the middleman program, and then YouTube to get you back online. And I thought, we're never all going to be able to make that triangle leap in a short time. So here we are, take 2, and hope for the best, right? Fingers crossed. Yeah, it was wild weather in Connecticut. We got kind of a high humidity, kind of high pressure air day. And then I took the kids out to the skate park, like in the evening at 7:30 when it was just in the low 90s. And all of a sudden, this terrible black cloud rolled in, and it was like crazy rain, just crazy. And heat lightning in the sky, you know, with the Frankenstein hand coming down. It was exciting. We went to the skate park, and then that happened. And then we pulled into Dairy Queen like 1 minute later, got some ice creams, and I caved and got one of those nice orange Julius smoothies. And by the time we finished eating them, it had gone. I mean, it was still heat lightning in the sky. Wild gifts from summer, right? Mother Nature gives us all these different gifts in different seasons. It's kind of exciting. Hey, Kirsten. Super hot, right? Super hot, super hat, super hot. Good to see you. Super chat. That's right. I forgot that I have super chat here. That is a handy thing. Kira, good morning. I hope everybody's finding the thread this morning. I hope it's not confusing because I use the same photo. I did not want to give up the skunk. He was too good of a photo. Black sheep designs, Rhonda Manley. I love the cover photo so much. I wanted you to know that we were continuing on and I wasn't ditching the subject. But I hope it's not confusing. Joy, good morning. We will figure out your wool. I did a really bad job of calculating, didn't I? I thought that program was going to be a lifesaver for me with like, outsized stuff, but apparently not. But I have scraps of all yours, so I'll be able to figure it out easily. Tara, good morning. Good to see you. I love the way your Van Gogh chair is evolving. It looks so, so good. So good. Beverly, good to see you. Beautiful blue sky today. There we go. One of the gifts of summer. Linda, good to see you. Good morning. Doreen, hello. And Robin, you just found us last week. Oh, great. Well, in 1 week, it's amazing how much you can learn, isn't it? It keeps going and going. We tend to talk more about rug history and reviewing books on coffee time and cocktail time. But we do everything, don't we? We do everything. Oh, okay. Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much. Thank you. This screen, I wish you could see it. It looks like I'm DJing or something. There's so many different things going on, and only one of them I understand. Well, I understand my picture, and then I understand your typing to me, but everything else is a big mystery. Kira and Kirsten. All right. Welcome. Definitely welcome to Robin. So, I solved my problem. You know how the 2 pieces of mail went missing? The 2, what were they? The Dutch Treat, the Tulip punch kit sets. And man, did that turn out to be a huge pain in the tailpipe. Unbelievable. It set me back a full day, but I re-dyed everything, resent everything. It's better than original, but let me know if they turn up by accident in a package that I sent to you. I could have sent it to anybody, really. Super frustrating. So I am sending out right now. I sent out just about everything else, including Kaz. Your rug is going out now, the wedding rug. And I'm cutting these up in the next few minutes. Those are the soda jerk set. And I just want to show you the mystery pattern because there's been quite a few ordered. So since they're ordered and they're going out, it's not going to be a mystery for long. This is the pattern that I worked out. I hope you like it. With these swatch sets, being 25 swatch sets that are like, I think 13 by 3, they're bit bigger than that. They're little oversized swatch sets, not like a regular door swatch set, but quite a bit bigger. So it's a lot, but each swatch will turn into a quarter of that size, once it's hooked. So I try to come up with patterns that have a lot of hit or miss possibilities. So there's not a lot of one color, and you can plug in as many colors from your swatch set as you want, and then look at other things that you've got, whether it's yarns or different materials, quilting fabric, cut up t-shirts, whatever else you have you want to plug in. But the pattern comes on fiber tape, so you can transfer it to whatever your favorite backing is. But this is going to be the pattern. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. This is the pattern for the ice cream thing. A little sundae cup. I wanted it to be completely different than the cornucopia pattern. A little sundae cup reminded me of Friendly's, where we like to go and eat with the little wings. A lot of our ice cream places in New England use wings as a symbol for ice cream. I hope that's not sacrilegious, but I thought it was quite cute. Can be done with or without wings. And then the idea is, I did that tilted diamond like we were talking about the other day on Coffee Time. And the idea is, if you want to, you could continue these lamb's tongues. I keep my fingers doing the reverse. I can't. You can continue the lamb's tongues out into the borders, right? You can just lamb it out, tongue it out right into the corners if you want to add more and more color, or you could do a crazy hit or miss background in the corners. So I thought that's a nice simple pattern to go with those ice cream colors. You could always, of course, if you don't want to do the ice cream, don't do the ice cream. Do welcome, do the year, do your initials, little saying, little motif, whatever. But this is the pattern that's coming for free with the ice cream sets. I think I have 4 sets left, and then that will be it for a while until I start redoing stuff later in the year. Beverly, thank you. Oh, it should be there in a couple of days because I'll be posting it today. Yeah, lots of stuff going on, but to check Ribbon Candy Hooking. There's lots of classes going on. I've got a lot of in-person appearances coming up, teaching things going on in the near future. I won't tell you every day because it gets super boring. I'm working on my mod patterns. I'm working on all of that. If you are signed up for the dye class, I will send you a message by the weekend about just pots and pans. No pressure, no stress. Everything is supposed to be for fun. Same with the Maud Lewis class. I'll send you, I haven't even done the paperwork for that yet in terms of sending you drawings and motifs to print out so we can use them for our games and composition sort of projects during the class. But that hasn't come yet, and that won't come until it's a little bit closer to the class. Hey, Diane. Embellish with velvet sash. Yep, that would be, adding velvet would be great too. And of course I have velvet in the background of the cornucopia, which I still haven't finished. All this beautiful velvet. Diane, there were like 30 colors of yours I wanted just now, so I'm going to go on after coffee time and sort that out. It's a lot, but I'm getting myself squared away with the next sets. I wanted to show you a couple things I'm working on in the next couple days, but they're way over there. A few little fall designs for beginners who are taking the classes with me, the beginner classes. They get a punch needle and a hook, and they get one punch kit and one rug hooking kit. So I'm coming up with some new designs because I'm just anticipating getting, I don't want to say we're getting to the end of summer because we're smack in the middle, beginning middle still in my mind, but I want to get some kits together that are a bit more like Indian summer feel, going into like autumn wind. I'm not going to say we're changing seasons, but I want to be offering some things that are a little bit more pumpkin-y and harvesty and stuff like that. Assuming it's going to take a little while to finish some of these beginner kits. So I'll show you those. I'll show you those on Friday. So I'm going to work on Midwest books now, and I wanted to do an all Canada episode on Friday, but I think we're going to end up talking about Midwest books on Friday night for cocktail night. And then I'm looking at that possibility of a green screen so we can look at some other rugs. I want to pull up current Canadian makers, not just Dion Fitzpatrick, but lots of people who are up there doing amazing work, very different work, much more in the vein of the British rag rug than the American very even pile Pearl McGowan looped rug, right? It's very, very different work, and I'd like to show it and look at it close up. So I am trying to figure out technology-wise how far I can push it safely without shutting the whole operation down. But I want to talk about Canada and Canadian makers. Hey, Anne, speaking of people from Canada, next week. So let's go back into this book where we left off yesterday, which was the beginning. And then on Friday, we're going to look at Rugs of the Midwest again. And I'll put some more stuff together between now and then. There is that great Midwest, I think it's an ATHA-related group on Facebook, if you're on Facebook. I love that group. There's a couple of Midwest sort of geographically themed rug hooking groups. And I really like those groups because there's not a lot of crossover to all of the other bigger groups on the internet, on Facebook. Of course, our group is Rug Hooking and Punch Needle Club, which is my favorite group. But, you know, the Western groups are very nice groups, and they tend to be very sort of local in feel. And it's nice to know what projects people are working on and what challenges people have going in different parts of the country. It's very inspiring, and it gives me the sense that there's lots happening. So check out all of those different groups on Facebook if you're not into them already, and if you obviously are on Facebook, because they are interesting, and you do see different rugs than you do on all of the other, you know, huge groups. And I like the littler groups better anyway. So check those out if you get a chance. So, you know, where did we leave off yesterday? It was so traumatic when the power went out. I got all deer in the headlights and nutty. But we were talking about, let's see, we had just finished talking about thrumming. I think we made it that far. Yeah, and then we were here. We were talking about when rug hooking as a craft was very visible in the Midwest, specifically in the Midwest. And the answer she gave, and I think we got through this, was there are references to rug hooking in 1854 in the publication called The Valley Farmer. So certainly mid-century, mid-19th century, rug hooking is a known thing. So then I think this is right where we left off. I got like a stomach cramp when I opened this page, so that must have been where it happened, because I was like, I kept looking up at the thing, and oh man. So Midwestern papers, newspapers, right? Newspapers, almanacs, anything paper that people would have picked up and read on a regular basis handled and discussed rug hooking, because it was a fairly new thing. It was a new craft. People needed to be told how to do it in the kinds of terms that only would work in the 19th century. Very detailed, loose, abstract descriptions of what material you needed to make and how to do it in a nutshell. But, you know, people were so much more capable and handy back then. Even with a little bit of information, people could run and bend a nail, make a hook, stretch their backing, and have a rug done a week later. So it was just a different time. I left off talking about this great reference to a New Hampshire writer called Clara Augusta Jones, an excerpt from a piece that she wrote appeared in the Ohio Farmer on January 2nd, 1869, and it's part of a short story. And it's a short story that is making the sort of overarching joke about how crazy rug hookers can get. And I know this story, you know this story, even as a beginner, Robin, you might know this story already. You get crazy. You get crazy about scraps, you get crazy about colors, your eye just starts to wander and see things even if someone's wearing them, and you think, oh, that's the color that I need for this specific thing. This short story was really sort of making fun of that kind of caricature. Hey, Tara. Hey, Amber. Yes, thumbs up, please. Sunny in Calgary. Ann, I'm so happy to hear that. You deserve some nice weather after all this crazy summer. So this is an excerpt that Mary Collins Burrell puts into this book that is, you know, her research in this book in old Midwestern periodicals. It reminds me of being in the library and looking at microfiche. I don't know how it's done anymore, I guess just on the regular computer. But her research is exhaustive, and she has turned up some amazing pieces of writing from these 19th century sources. This is one of them. Way down the rabbit hole, right, Robin? Right down the rabbit hole. I was going to say that sounds so weird. Right down the rabbit hole. You get so sort of seduced by everything color-wise and texture-wise around you. It's like a new sense, like beyond sight, kicks in, and you know there's another like layer to reality. You're just like you're seeing like you're one of the X-Men or something, and you have this crazy superpower of like wanting to pick and use and grab different things for your rugs. It's fun though, isn't it? So this is how it's described by Clara Augusta Jones in her short story. The short story is about this woman who is infected with this mania, and her name is Mrs. Ellen Pearson. And she's described in the short story as being as mad as a March hare, which is a common expression in those days too, when it came to rug hooking. And this is the excerpt that Mary found for this book. She writes of Ellen, she was always hooking a rug. Her children run wild, her housework did itself, her husband's clothes went to ruin, And if she combed her hair once a week, she bemoaned the loss of time for 24 hours afterwards. She put everything into her rugs. Her children went half frozen that their flannels might figure in these flowered abominations. Her own dresses were never half worn when sacrificed, and poor Mr. Pearson had to keep his spare clothes under lock and key. So I really have to chase that source and see if we can read more of that for one of our story times. But I thought that was such a funny excerpt. We have heard this kind of thing before. I never returned to that great book. I think it was Mary Ellen Chase. Maybe no, that's the As the World Turns. Oh, it'll come to me. That wrote by hook or by crook. This sort of comic book, sort of narrative fiction book about rug hooking. Same kind of a sentiment. But we'll have to research that a little bit better because that has potential. Now, this story relates to a terrible afternoon during which her husband trips, falls over her rug frame into the arms of a visiting local gossip who promptly reports him for drunkenness to the local minister. This is in the story. When the minister arrives to see the problem for itself, he barely escapes with his clothing as Mrs. Pearson eyes the fabrics. If you can still hear me, please send a message because I'm getting that note again that the internet is connected. This is like a joke. Says successfully connected. Okay, Robin, thank you. I was just about to throw my computer out the window. Okay, good. Whew. What is going on? I hope you caught that we just did, that great excerpt. Okay, thank you. That's me making that noise. So anyway, the Ohio farmer, this, we'll hope for the best. We'll hope for the best. And if it happens again and we can't come back, look for a message from me on Facebook if you can. Super frustrating. So anyway, along these same lines, she finds another source, again in the Ohio farmer, because I don't know, I've actually never been to Ohio at all, but apparently the Ohio farmer was kind of like a farmer's almanac at this time, the 1870s, and contained everything a person would need to know to live, to survive, to make a home, to make things work. Okay, thank you. Hey, Karen. So there were lots of things that popped up in the Ohio farmer, and some of them that she writes in this book, Mary puts in this book, are so interesting to the history of rug hooking. Not just little comic sketches like the one we just looked at, but this item that appeared in 1871 under the category just making rugs. Now, this is along the lines of if you were, oh, it keeps breaking up. Super. Give me a little feedback if you can about the quality of the sound, because I hate to keep going with such a good subject if this is a low quality video. I'd rather save my fire. Oh, this is super aggravating. I'm going to keep going for a minute, and if it keeps happening, I'm just going to save it for a long episode on Friday night, because again, I don't want to squander such good content, and this is such a good book. I'm going to keep going for a little while and see what happens. Okay, thanks, Kira. So in the Ohio farmer, this is the kind of instruction that you would get as a housewife, as a person who had the idea about making rugs. This is what you would get. And this is a quote from the Ohio farmer, 1871. Take a piece of common tow cloth or a good coffee bag of the size you wish your rug to be. Make a hem all around the edge, 1/2 inch in its width, and sew it strongly into frames after the manner of a quilt. That in itself is interesting because they're telling you basically to use your quilting equipment. And then they're going to tell you to get a nail and bend it and put it into a piece of wood, for your hook. But it's interesting to note that it is sort of pre-assumed that you already have quilting equipment. And it's going to be a very short leap to rug making from there. Okay, good. Thank you. So upon this foundation, mark out with red cloth or a carpenter's pencil. That reference I don't know. Mark out with red cloth or a carpenter's pencil the pattern you wish to work into your rug. So pausing there again, it's assuming that you are confident enough in your creative ability to be able to come up with a pattern that you want to use all your clothing and scraps on. So the story is hilarious, isn't it, Amber? This you may take from another rug or imitate a worsted pattern or any bouquet of flowers, in wallpaper. So in other words, if you see another rug, can you imagine this on Facebook right now, how crucified you'd be if you wrote this on Facebook in 2021? Just copy another pattern, or look for, imitate a worsted pattern, meaning like a pattern that's on cloth, like that you would find at your general store, or copy the flowers in your wallpaper. These are all viable designs. Of course, these are going to give you designs, unless everything around you is brand new. I'm assuming your wallpaper is 10, 20 years old, as most people's, I think, would be. You're copying designs that are a little bit older, but these are all viable options. The rags are to be torn or cut into strips 1/2 inch wide, more or less, according to their thickness and texture. I'm going to pause there too, because this is still great advice. If you do not have a cutter, you do not need a cutter. They were super creative, right, Kira? Oh, thanks, Anne. You can still cut and rip your fabric into strips. You're not going to get it thin because it will sort of disintegrate and atomize if you cut it too thin. Even the best wool, the door wool, doesn't have the integrity to cut super thin. But you can cut it into 1/2 inch strips, and then you can hook with it. And it looks fabulous because it looks like a beautiful old historic rug, right? When you work this way, you can absolutely still do this. And she's putting in this kind of very subtle disclaimer: rip it 1/2 inch or less according to its texture and thickness. So you get a feel for this, as with everything. If you're working with a really loose weave, it's not going to rip well, and it's not going to rip into thin strips. And you just know that. The more you handle fabric, particularly wool, you just get a feel for this one ain't going to play this game. So you have to just rip it a bit wider. But you do get a feel for it. It's not something you are born intuitively knowing. It's something that you figure out as you go along. So I think it's still very good advice. And she says, and then sort all of your strips by color. So first you're ripping, then you're sorting all the reds together, all the greens together, all the blues together. The needle or hook with which the rags are to be drawn into the toe cloth is in shape very much like a big crochet needle and set into a wooden handle. Any blacksmith can make one. The first one we used was made from an old steel fork. The tines were broken off and the lower part of the shaft filed into the required shape. So that's what you get. That's what you get in 1871 in the Ohio Farmer. You're told to go to the blacksmith with a fork, and he's going to sort of cut it down, break the tines off, and form it into the shape that you think that you need. Now, think about how fussy we are at this point with our hooks. I have been suckered into buying so many newfangled hooks that don't work nearly as well as my old Claire Murray or Joan Moshimer, and are super expensive. And it really depends on how your hand likes to hold your hook. Up, under, on top, side of, like a crochet hook, and what sort of size and feel. It's very tactile and it's very personal. You like to, have a hook be, whether it's the pear-shaped or the thin pencil shape or something in between. But at this point, it's such a new craft that what you get is what you get, and you don't get upset. It's just the way that it is. You can't afford to be fussy about, oh dear, I wish it was more of a pear shape. Then you made it, blacksmith. He's going to give you what he gives you, and you're going to be very grateful to get it because it's going to work. It just might be a bit fiddly, right, and a bit callousy and a bit blistery. But those huge things aside, it's going to work. Hey, Jill. If you have loose weave, you can slightly full it. That's a good point. Yep, absolutely. So if you do have a woolen that is like a loose weave, and by that I mean it looks really open, like the weave is much more open, it's not a tight weave, you can absolutely put it into the washer and into the dryer, and it's, that's the way people felt, right? But it will what's called full it, F-U-L-L, meaning it makes it a bit tighter. You're shrinking it just a little bit. It's felting it just a little bit. You don't want to felt it too much because it becomes too thick to work with and too hard to pull through. But if you put it through the wash, I've put some things, including sweaters, wool sweaters, through the wash 3 or 4 times, thin ones like merino, and regular wool, like just very loose weave wool, put it through multiple times, the washer and the dryer, until I feel like it has enough integrity that it's not going to break every other loop and drive me crazy. Now, there will always be those wools that will break every other loop, and I have fulled them multiple times. Let me grab this right here to show you, because this is one that I'm playing with right now, right? It was in a pile of some braiding wool in some antique store or something, and I picked it up because I love it. I'm using this for my for the Mauve Lewis with the houses that I haven't showed you yet, that I'm working on with a deep dip in it, the hill. So this is very quite loose weave. This is meant for braiding, of course, but I love it, and I'm using it for one of the little cottages. And I'm not going to put this. I could put it in the washer dryer. I could, break it off and put it in a lingerie bag so it doesn't completely fall apart and break the washer dryer. But you can see you probably can't see here, but I can see right through it. Like I could watch a TV show right through it. It's quite open weave. So, what I'm doing with it is struggling, but I'm still using it. Again, if I weren't so lazy and pressed for time all the time, I probably would break it up into strips and put it in a lingerie bag and do just what Jill is describing in the washer dryer to full it. But I'm just making the point that there are times when, not this exact scenario, you do have a fiber, a material that you got maybe recycled from the thrift store, and you wash it, you dry it, you wash it, you dry it. It's like Groundhog Day, and it just is not going to do its job. It's not going to become any fuller. It's not going to show you any more integrity. And you're going to have to be at that weird sort of crossroads where you say, do I love it enough that I'm going to try to hook with it? Because I have been hooking with this, and it does break quite a bit. It's very shreddy, thready, and I can see there's going to be some time after I'm finished with the whole piece, clipping and trimming with my scissors so that it looks a bit more tidy. But at the end of the day, for me, I love this. It's green and sort of magenta. It's super unusual. I love it. And it's difficult to work with, and it's a bit of a pig's breakfast, but I love it, and I do love the way it's hooking. And I know that with scissors, I can clip up all the sort of shreddies at the end of it, and it's going to be great. But there are times where you are not going to get even 100% wool into the sort of state that it will be beautiful and lush to hook with. It's not going to always happen. So you have to decide, is it worth it? How much aggravation can I handle? Is it even aggravating to me? If you're a super sort of laid back, relaxed person, you might see it as, it is what it is. I'll clean it up later. No biggie. So it really is always going to depend on you and how you feel about it. And certainly in one piece, you can use pieces of wool that are cut to a 1/2 inch because they're super thick and you can't make them any thinner or they'll fall apart, with sort of better quality wool that's thinner. You can use as many different cuts in one rug as you want. If you're a beginner, maybe you need somebody to say that out loud. You can do any kind of combo you want with your piece. Let's see, Kara says, I wonder if it is a man that is giving the advice to the women. That's a good point, Kara. It usually is a man. I mean, historically, that gives women advice. Just classic example being Betty Crocker, right? Because there never was a Betty Crocker. It was a group of 4 men who sat around compiling recipes, into a cookbook. It's usually men in the 19th century who are doing this kind of writing, with very few exceptions. But they obviously have firsthand knowledge about how rug hooking works, so they're able to give a description that's good enough that you can run with it, right? This description has legs. You can go to the blacksmith and get it going, but it does have sort of the feel of a man for sure. It's very cut and dry. It's very black and white. It's not very descriptive. And I don't know if that's a word count thing or if you're right and it's a man who's writing who hasn't maybe hooked rugs at all. But you do get a lot of that. That's really well documented at that time. I didn't realize it would thicken. Yep, it definitely thickens up more when you wash it. Definitely thickens up because you're felting it, essentially. And you can put it in the washer and the dryer. Shocking wool between hot and cold and agitation will help it full. That's a good tip, Karen. So Karen says shocking wool between hot and cold and agitation will make the wool full. We got to turn that into a motto somehow, right? That's a good rhyme. Great. All right. Yep, this is such good information that's going in the sideline here. So these kinds of descriptions, I'm going to run over a little bit. These kinds of descriptions I think are so interesting, and there's a lot of them in this sort of handcrafted history chapter. Again, in 1877, in the Troy, T-R-O-Y, it's a hard word to say, County Herald, November 7th, 1877, another entry called Homemade Rugs. And this is interesting too. It brings out some different things, I think a bit more challenging. I'm going to read parts of it to you. Another rug is made very pretty by using alpaca oiled tibbets or merinos, so different kinds of wools. A coarse piece of hop sacking for the foundation, meaning like gunny sack or burlap sack, for the foundation with some pretty design marked out upon it is the first start for this rug. Of course, the language is a little bit tough and long-winded at this time too. Hem the sacking and sew it into a form much like quilting frames but smaller. So again, second reference to starting with your quilting frame. Now, we don't get a lot of references to equipment for quilting and rug hooking doubling in the Northeast. We get a description on how to build a rug hooking frame. So that in itself is culturally and geographically an interesting twist on what we know so far. Okay, so Linda says newbies might not be aware of the difference between wool, finer, for instance, cotton fiber. Okay, the scales on wool fibers lock into each other when shocked. So totally different properties between cotton and wool. And Linda's making the great point. You might be working with a fabric that you don't know the content. It could even have some synthetic content to it. But when you look at something that's a weave, that's woven, those are the kinds of materials that you can shock and full and felt because they are interlocked, right? Like woven, like if you think of a loom, woven, as opposed to something that's knit. And if you're a knitter, that makes sense, right? Because when you have something that's knit, it's going in one of the knitting stitches. And of course, a knitting machine can do hundreds, if not thousands, of different kinds of knits. But obviously, a jersey knit looks different, feels different, stretches completely differently than a wool would or can. So all of these fabrics have different properties, and you can hook with anything. It'll always boil down to, do you want it to be wool? And if you want it to be wool, is it because you want it on the floor and you know that wool is very durable as opposed to, for example, t-shirts? A lot of people do make t-shirt rugs and put them on the floor, but it is, of course, a little less durable. If you're putting stuff on the wall or on the back of your chair or your couch or on your table, or even stair risers, not the treads, but the risers, it won't matter. But you can really hook with anything you want. It's just a question of how to treat it, like before you start working with it, in a way that is going to make it the best and easiest to then work with. So those are where, on Facebook and here, it's great to ask those kinds of questions because people know the answers to them who have already had plenty of pratfalls with materials, right? Trying to hook materials. Amber says, my thing when I go to the second-hand store, if cashmere is not full of pills, it won't shrink because it's superwash. Okay, that's a good tip too. It is, it's great tip. It's great to find sweaters at the thrift stores. Some of them will never full. Amber's absolutely right. And you can still hook with them. You just have to cut them. And I've been cutting sweaters with a rotary cutter. I did a sweater kit yesterday, the Hidden Hearts. Beautiful. Some of the sweater materials I have, because I still have hundreds of sweaters ready to go for fall for more kits that'll be coming out. But I've been cutting it with a rotary cutter and it works great, just like the velvet. But I agree. I wouldn't put into a kit something merino or superwash or something like that because it is super thin. I would hook with it myself because I've gotten used to how it folds, how it flops, how it handles. But I would never do that to somebody else. If you get that kind of material, just make it, my tip along with Amber's, make it as full as you can. Cut it a little bit thicker because it has a little bit less sort of integrity coming through as a loop. And just do a little bit of a sample, cut a little bit of a sample and see how it goes first. All of those things are workable and usable, but that is a really great tip because it is fun to find stuff at the thrift store. Talk about our subject today, right? Finding old stuff, using old stuff, thrifting, making do, recycling scraps. Karen says the finer wools pill, but don't full as easily as coarser wool. And alternately, I have so many sweaters that have gone through the wash once, like not even on hot, and are way too thick, too full. Another tip that I would give you was to hook with, in other words. So those are all, I'm going to put them out somewhere on one of the Facebook pages for someone to do different crafting with, like wool applique, because for hooking, they're just over the top. Another tip, if you're looking for example, wool sweaters at the thrift store, do not get cables. It is very hard to get a cable because usually it's a strip, a cable, a strip, a cable, those kinds of sort of preppy sweaters. it's extremely hard to get. If half of it's cables, those cables are going to come apart no matter what you do to it. It's impossible. I found it impossible to get the cables fulled or thick enough, felted enough to be able to use. They will come apart. And then I find myself only using the alternate strips in between the cables. And sometimes it's too much money to spend on a sweater when it's a cable sweater and you can't use the cable part. So tell me if you've had success with cables, because I might be completely an odd duck here, but I have a lot of cable sweaters and I can't use any of them because too many cables, too frustrating. So this was interesting. So again, our second reference to using your quilting equipment as a frame, right? But they're saying it's but smaller. So we're talking about a smaller rug. They're probably still looking to, well, they're working off a sack, right? They're working off a sack. So we know they're doing something that at most is like a hearth rug size. It can't be more than that. Like a 100-pound sack is still going to be a hearth rug size. A 50-pound sack, even less. Like a little thing for the table or something that you need to join together before you start hooking on. So you would need a smaller frame. You don't need that giant quilting frame because we're talking about a much smaller product. And then it says to cut your rags into strips from 1.5 inches in width to 3/4 of an inch according to the thickness of the cloth. Have a hook like a crochet needle, only larger. Now here comes a wacky one. Mine was made out of a parasol brace. Right, like an umbrella brace. Did the work nicely and is good for a dozen more rugs. Now this I really had to think about for a while because she's not saying bend a nail and bring it to the blacksmith. She's saying she took a brace out of an umbrella and somehow she must have bent it and used it. And she's hinting at the fact that it's not a permanent state of being. The brace must be thin, right? So it's not going to work until the end of time. But she's saying she thinks she's got a dozen more rugs in this hook that she made out of the parasol brace. Now, if that isn't the cutest sort of addition to the history of rug hooking, I have never heard that before. Break up a parasol and use the brace, right? Beverly says, take the cable sweaters apart and reuse. You know, that's a great idea, Beverly. That's a great idea. You know, I am more tempted to do that. So Beverly's saying, when you have something that you can't use for whatever reason, like I'm saying, what am I going to do with these rugs that just turned out to be too full and too thick to hook with? Beverly's saying, take them apart. Like I've got my spinner attached to the ironing board over here, so I can't show you. But you can actually get the end of the yarn. And if you have a wool spinner, you know, which costs like $20 off Amazon or at Joann's, you can just spin all that wool up into a yarn ball, and then you use a yarn ball for hooking. And if it's too thin, you just double it or quadruple it up to hook. Or if you punch needle, you can also double it or quadruple it up. But then you've got all that beautiful wool. And if it's color changing wool, if it was like an argyle or something like that, you have multiple colors in there. So that's a great idea. I always forget about that. That's a great idea. Reuse, recycle, all that stuff, right? So this parasol brace did the job nicely for her, assuming it's a her, right, Kira? So I'm not going to go into great detail, but she does actually, I think this must be a woman, right? Because she goes into great detail about pressing the hook from the upper side up through the cloth underneath, and she talks about how to hold your hands above and below your backing cloth to actually do the loops. She's telling you in just this one paragraph how to actually hook and make loops. So I'm guessing that this possibly is a true person who sent in this article. A person must exercise taste in shading and sorting their colors to look pretty. After the figure of the pattern is finished, the groundwork can be filled up with drab brown or black. Now she's probably offering those colors as suggestions because they're such common colors, work clothes colors, right? Work clothes, the kinds of clothes that will get holes and fail. And become garbage, and the kinds of clothes that you want to cut up and then use. So she's giving lots of very practical advice in this article. The design can be drawn as flowers, animals, or landscape as one's fancies dictate. After the whole thing is complete and all the spaces are filled up, like paint by number style, right, which can be easily ascertained by looking at the underside. Take a sharp pair of scissors and cut off all the loops. Then shear off the ends. True. Shear off the ends, true. Old sort of language quirk. But she's talking about a clipped rug. So she's got a hooped rug, and then she's going to clip all the hoops and make it not a piled rug, not a looped rug. So just a variation. It will look like a Brussels carpet with proper care and it will last a lifetime. After a few years, if the colors are rusty or faded, it can be sheared lightly over the entire surface, and it will look as bright and good as new. When I was a little girl, I drew in a rug with a big needle. The effect was the same as my hooked one, but it was harder and it took more time, as the needle had to be threaded so often. The rug had been in constant wear for a quarter of a century, and today it is as handsome as ever. It was sheared last year, and not a sign of age or wear is visible upon it. It was a great deal of work and requires patience to make one, but it pays to do so. Now, isn't that interesting? She's basically saying, I'm going to stop here because I do want to get some work done with orders and stuff. She's basically saying there are a few things besides the parasol brace. She's describing a rug that she has clipped, and she's clipped it because she did a rug like this when she was a little girl, a quarter of a century ago. Somebody must have directed her to do it, or somebody saw a Brussels rug with a pile surface rather than a loop surface, and she really wanted that sort of desired look. So she got into the habit of clipping her rugs, right? And we already know there are looped rugs in the Midwest and clipped rugs, because the last article referred to looped rugs. She's talking about clipping. But she's giving the great idea that she must have had very high loops, because she's saying whenever it starts to look, she uses the word rusty, which I think is quaint and sweet. But whenever it starts to look dirty and old, she just clips it a little bit in those places, and there it is, bright as new. And 25 years later, I'm sure these rugs are hard wearing and hard used. She's saying it looks as good as new 25 years later. That's amazing. What a fantastic bit of insight. What a great idea, right? It's just so interesting reading these old sources. Let me catch up on what we were doing here. Sweaters that won't full can be used for other projects. Oh, you made wool pumpkins, Amber. That sounds super fun. Like three-dimensional pumpkins with pattern pieces, like the moon pieces. That would be, I would love to do that this year. This is the year for that. And Jill says, do you need to steam the kinks out of the yarn from knitting before using it for punched rugs or hooked rugs? Jill, when I have done that, unraveling something, I haven't. But I'm a real sloppy pig in the way that I work on my own projects. So that might not be the right answer, but I haven't at all. I do everything with my Knit Picks winder, and it winds pretty tight into a cake, and I'm pretty happy with the result. Winds it into a cake, and then you always want to pull from the center. And I find when I do that with something that I have unraveled, or taken apart, like something that I hooked and I don't like and I want to put back on the roll, it is loopy for a while because the center is the most sort of congested part of the cake of wool. But as you get to the outside, it's already smoothed itself out. That's my experience anyway. And Anne says, use cable sweaters for the back of a hooked pillow. That's a great idea, Anne. Anne, that's a great idea. Of course, you can use them because the texture's so interesting and varied. You just don't want to hook with them, but of course you should use them for the back of a pillow. They absolutely lend themselves perfectly stretch-wise and in terms of being able to sew them. If I was going to sew something like a sweater, I would first reinforce it by sewing on a piece of bias tape or something, so I had a nice firm, non-stretchy surface to sew into when I was actually attaching the pillows together. I do have a video on sewing pillows on the Ribbon Candy Hooking channel. Jill says, Anne, I'm curious, what do you mean by that? And I think you probably described it. When people make a pillow like a hooked front, they don't necessarily want a hooked back. So you usually have like a solid back, like broadcloth or canvas or whatever. But you could certainly use a sweater as the back of it too. Nice and soft and cozy. Would work just as well as any other fabric, especially if it's a sweater that you can't use for anything else. Yeah, Anne is describing, when you make a pillow, the front is the hooked picture, and the back of the pillow is the cable sweater, a cut to fit. Yep. Okay. Jill, the kinks will add texture. You can steam them. That's a good point, Amber. If you do get kinks, right, you can always steam them with your blocking process at the end of the project if you are going to block. But then again, just remember, I'm going to say Dion Fitzpatrick again, when you think about the Canadians, the way that they work, the sort of variety of height, of fiber, of texture, the thickness, the different gauges, the everything being different piles throughout their finished pieces. You always should check in with yourself first. If you do have a loopy texture or something different, you should check in with yourself first and say, self, do I like it? Do I want to change it? Is there a reason? Do I want to change it because I think in changing it I'm making it right? Or do I want to change it because I think I'll prefer the way it will look when it's a bit smoother? You have to ask yourself that question, because once you start steaming it and blocking it, you don't get all those sort of organic quirks that you started with. And those quirks are not a bad thing. It's just a different style. And if it's your style, then you want things to be, filled with variety and texture. Kira says, I used a piece of cashmere sweater for the back of a pillow, so soft. Absolutely. So nice to lay on too, and there's a good show on, right? Jill says, good to know, and Amber says, yes, 3D pumpkins. Yeah. Amber, if you have a pattern for that, I would love to see it or post it on our page or something. I'm looking to do some 3-dimensional pumpkins for sure this year. Seriously, it's time. It's time for some pumpkins. So let's go back to this on Friday. We're going to come back to hooked rugs of the Midwest. There's so much more, and I'm going to do some more research in the meantime on some rug hookers in the Midwest. I'm going to do some more research into the rug hooking groups that are on Facebook in the Midwest, and see if I can pull up some images that are not in this book that I can add to the commentary, so that we can have a nice full show. We will have a nice full show because this book is fantastic on Friday, and talk specifically, continue looking at these early references, first references to rug hooking in the Midwest, mid-19th century almanacs and newspapers where women were writing and sharing information about starting rug hooking. So interesting and so important for us to know, because you can really use some of these tips today for your stuff too. They really knew what they were doing, and they prefer. Debbie says she prefers no steaming, too flat after blocking. Debbie, I have to agree with you. I've never been one for the even pile look. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and when I see other people's rugs and they're perfectly even, they look immaculate and gorgeous. But I agree, for myself too, I like things to have a bit more variety. But I'm not talking about rugs for the floor. Rugs for the floor I would want pretty even and trip proof. But I agree, I think a lot of people have been programmed to think that something that has too much texture on the surface is incorrect, is not properly hooked. And that is absolutely not true. It's one of these sort of myth things that we need to eradicate sooner rather than later, because having that pristine, immaculate surface is a moment in rug hooking time, and it's one of many styles. But having wild and crazy surfaces is another style, and having everything in between is another style. So however your rug is coming out, if you like the way that it looks as is, you should leave it as is, right? We only block things to sort of mellow them and give them a more even, uniform surface. But if that's not what you're going for, absolutely don't do it. If you love the way it's looking, and you finish it and you love the way it looks right there like that, then leave it just like that. Don't do anything extra to it that is going to change that. So yeah, good tip, Debbie. Absolutely. Kira, good to see you. Good to see you all. I will see you on Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for cocktail night. We'll have a nice drink together, and we'll continue talking about these gems that come out of this book and everything else I can find out between now and then on rug hooking in the Midwest. So we will have a fun party on Friday night. In the meantime, a bunch of things in the Ribbon Candy Hooking Store, including the Zoom class that's coming up, the dyeing class. You have just enough time if you sign up for that for me to get you a kit out. Kirsten, I'm getting your kit out. And the mod class, and I will put up a date for the book club. I haven't gotten there yet, a single thread by Tracy Chevalier. So I'll put that up in the next couple of days too. Have a great tomorrow, everybody. I'm going to go to my mom's again, do some work there, work on some of these prototypes for some of the fall designs. And in the meantime, I think I'm caught up on my order. So feel free to buy some more stuff. I'll see you soon. Happy week, and I'll see you on Friday for cocktail night. Take care.